Hi guys, this is our second analysis of Paul Revere's Ride. I'm going to go through and we're going to analyze the narrative elements as well as the poetic devices and figurative language. And then you have an assignment as you analyze it to turn in after. So take some notes, get your copy out. I will be sharing my screen in just a moment. Hopefully you enjoyed the historical background, all the historical inaccuracies that Longfellow put in this poem to kind of call the North into action, to remind them what they did during the Revolutionary War to get them to act now during the Civil War. And so we're going to be reading this together. This is an epic, and if you remember from your poetry introduction, an epic is a type of narrative that tells a story of a hero. And so Paul Revere is written as our hero in the story, although it's not quite accurate because he's not the one that made it to give the militia their heads up. So we're going to read now this epic together and analyze the story and the figurative language and poetic elements. Okay, so let me share my screen. And what I've done is I've given you actually the textbook pages that I would actually use if we were together. Instead of just giving you a copy, this one kind of breaks it down and has some different questions as you're critically viewing it. And so we're actually going to work with this copy that we would have worked with in the classroom. And so I'm gonna actually mark up as we go through it together so that you can kind of analyze it together with me. So, Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. So let's stop here. This is just the first stanza. There's so much going on. This is our exposition. We have this development of the second person as this person is using you. And so in this first line, and actually, again, I'll stop in line, I think it's 111, he speaks directly to us, the reader. So this is second person using you. Listen, my children, you shall hear. If you notice the end rhyme here, this is something that adds to the musicality, the horse galloping rhythm and meter of the poem. You have here, which is labeled with the end rhyme A. Revere rhymes with here, so that's also A. 5 is a new word that rhymes, so that would be labeled B. Alive rhymes again with 5, so that would be labeled B. And then year again is the same as here in Revere, so it's A. So our first stanza is A, B, B, A. So that's how the end rhyme works through this stanza. It changes a little bit as we move through as the stanzas get longer, but that's the start to this end rhyme in the rhythm of the poem. We also have set up one of our characters here in the exposition is Paul Revere. We know that the other character is his unnamed friend. And then we have the time period, the Revolutionary War, April of 1975. So lots of the exposition in just this first stanza. Okay, as we're moving on, he said to his friend, okay, so there's the other main character of this narrative, his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light. Okay, so this is developing the conflict, right? So the British are coming, and they want to be warned on how the British are coming. So that's developing the conflict. And so here's the plan. So this rising action here is them making the plan of how they're going to get this signal. So they're going to hang the signal in the lantern of the North Church, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea. That's that really famous line you may have heard in history before. Really, really famous. 1 light if the British come by land and 2 lights in the North Church Tower if they come by sea. And I, on the opposite shore, will be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. Notice those end rhyme there. Then he said good night, and with muffled oar, silently rowed to the Charlestown shore. So he is rowing his boat over to the shore and getting his horse ready so that when his friend in the tower gives him the signal, he can jump on his horse. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where the swinging wide at her moorings lay, the Somerset, British man of war, that's a ship, okay? So it's giving you that information in the bottom of the page. A phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar. There's a great simile. There's a really great simile as we start seeing a lot of imagery here, thinking about our sensory details. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What are we feeling? And a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears. Look at that. You got alliteration, wanders, watches. You got eager ears, using these alliterative statements to add to the musicality. Till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Well, what are grenadiers? Grenadiers are soldiers. So think about this activating our sense of hearing here. Sound of arms, tramp of feet, muster of men, lots of sounds going on. Then he climbed the tower of the old North Church by the wooden stairs with stealthy tread to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. Again, that alliterative statements, masses and moving, and then shapes of shade. And then you have this great example of personification. Rafters, the things that set up the church tower can't be somber. Remember, what does somber mean? It means dark and gloomy, sad, okay? So personifying the loneliness of the church. By the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and look down, a moment on the roofs of the town, and the moonlight flowing over all. Again, he can see the moonlight. He's describing to us in the poem this image, this lonely image of nighttime as he's waiting. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in the silence so deep and still that he could hear, like a sentinel's tread, the watchful night wind as it went, creeping along from tent to tent. I love that. Watchful night wind. Wind can't watch anything. Wind can't creep along, right? This great personifying of the wind. And seeming to whisper, right? So remember, wind can't whisper, all personifying the wind here. All is well. A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. Again, that church and the belfry being described as lonely. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide, like a bridge of boats. What's he seeing? He's seeing in the distance this line of black. So how are they coming? Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred with a heavy stride, on the opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth, and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search. He's waiting for this signal. This is getting to our climax here, coming to our climax. The belfry tower of the old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. Love that alliteration. There's three there: spectral and somber and still. Great alliteration. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp and the belfry burns. Here's your climax. Here's your climactic event. He's eagerly watching, sees the two lights, and jumps on his horse. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing a spark, struck out by a steed flying fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light, The fate of a nation was riding that night. So much going on here. Hurry of hoofs, right? That's alliteration. Flying fearless and fleet, there's really great alliteration. Pebbles passing, all this spark, struck, steed, right? He's adding to this musicality and this rhythm with all of the alliterative statements. And then we have this great metaphor. The fate of a nation was riding that night. So what does that mean? The fate of a nation. Without his ride, without his warning to the militia, they may have all been killed, right? So the fate of a nation, this metaphor of describing Paul Revere and his message as what's going to save the nation was riding that night. And the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. So we have so much going on here. More alliteration, spark struck, steed, right? Kindled the land into flame. Another great hyperbole here. Just thinking about how fast he's going and moving as he's getting this message started. He has left the village and mounted the steep. And beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. Again, so what are we hearing? We're hearing those hoofbeats that started out the poem in the beginning, right? It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. Okay, so this is our falling action. The three towns, him moving through the towns and giving his alarm and sounding and waking people up and giving them this message is the falling action. He crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and he felt the damp of the river fog that rises after the sun goes down. Great sensory detail here. We have barking that we hear. We have crowing that we hear. We can feel the dampness in the air. So much sensory details here. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington. He saw the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as he passed, and the meeting house windows blank and bare gaze at him with a spectral glare. So this is more personification here. Windows can't gaze at you, right? And blank and bare, more alliteration, right? Great. Gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. Your windows can't see, right? So he's talking about what is going to happen here when the militia come and take over these towns. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock, again, more direct hearing, and the twitter of the birds among the trees, and he felt the breath of the morning breeze, more feeling, right, blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest in the books you have read. Again, second person, directly talking to us, the reader, you. How the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again, under the trees at the turn of the road, and only passing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. So here we have our resolution of the story. He was successful. He was able to give them the message. His cry of alarm made it. They were able to get, the militia to be ready for the British. And then he's talking about really this message, this call to action for the Civil War here at the end. He's reminding them that the past happened, and this is a way that they can be called to action now in the Civil War. So for born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will awaken and listen to hear. They needed to hear what he was reminding them, and that was his kind of message to them. So great epic, a wonderful narrative, so much going on, a wonderful story with lots of figurative language, lots of poetic devices, adding to the musicality with the end rhyme and the alliterative statements, so much imagery and use of the sensory details. So read it through again and then answer those few questions for me.